All right, we are continuing our study of parenting. And if you're following in the workbook, we are on page 23 for lesson 4. And it deals with fathers take the lead is where we're focusing. This is September the 29th. We're for lesson 4. This is our 5th lesson, but lesson 4 in the workbook. And we'll continue in sequence until we get to the 6th lesson, and we'll divide that into 2. More about that a little bit later. We have been dealing with rules. Some of these are quite basic and simplistic. Some of them involve a little more application, and we try to give 1 or 2 rules for each class. And these are, again, basic, simple rules. Some of them apply, obviously, to the youngest of ages, and others will apply to older ages in the teenage years, etc. Here's rule number 9. Don't expect your child to be an adult. Try to see their world through their eyes. Agree with that? Why? All right, very good. Yeah, kids need to be kids. Is it possible to go to extremes in either direction where we expect the youngest of children to act like adults, and then as they get older, we still let them act like kids when they need to be maturing? Is that possible? Sure, that's possible. But here's the point. Don't expect your child to be an adult. Quite often, we expect them to reason like an adult, to think like an adult, and behave like an adult when they're still kids. And try to look at the kid or the child through their eyes. That doesn't excuse misbehavior. That doesn't excuse things like Proverbs 22:15, that foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. Children, by the nature of being children, will misbehave. Doesn't mean we tolerate that. The rod will drive it far from them, the text says. But the point is that I do not need to expect my child to be an adult in their thinking and their reasoning. So look at it through their eyes, and we better understand where they're coming from. Now recognize Ezekiel 3 is not talking about raising children, but the text talks about how Ezekiel sat where they sat. Remember that? In other words, he looked at it through their eyes. If you can understand from their vantage point, you're better able to deal with what they're going through. Maybe enforce the rule even better. Maybe have stronger discipline if I understand what they're going through. But nonetheless, look at them through their eyes. All right, here's rule number 10. That's going backwards. Let's go the other way. Don't compare your child to his or her siblings or other children. Would you agree with that? Now, there's some degree of comparison where we may compare children, saying this child is more interested in this and this child is more interested in that. The boy is different from the girl. Here's 2 girls in the same family, and they have different personalities. They have different interests. They go at things differently. We're not talking about that kind of comparison. What kind of comparison is not healthy in raising a child? Yeah, I don't feel like they measure up. Why don't you act like your older sibling? Or why can you not do what they do? Why can't you make the grades they make? Why don't you do it as well as they do it? And make them the standard. And the child feels like they never measure up. You agree with the principle? The rule? Not a bad rule. All right, let's go to page 23 in our workbook. Let's give some introductory things, and then we're going to go to our questions, and then back to our lesson on page 23. We're talking about fathers taking the lead. And you say, well, what about mothers? We deal with the mothers in another lesson. Our focus here is on fathers taking the lead. Our author makes these 3 points in his introduction, and that is, the father's headship in the home is the target of those who want to destroy the family. There are those who are not content with the fact that you may want your family to be a certain way, and they have an entirely different concept about family, and they are content for you to live your way, and there are some who are content with that, but there are many on the far left that are not content with that, but they're out to destroy the nuclear family. We'll see some quotes on that here in just a moment. And because of that, many fathers are affected by the various attacks on the home. You say, well, I'm not affected by that. I'm going to resist against that. Well, let me illustrate, for example, as we get into lesson 6 on discipline. When the far left keeps telling us that spanking is terrible and horrible for children, is there not a little bit of thinking goes on in our mind, even when we spank our children, to back off and dial it back just a little bit, at least in public, lest we be perceived as being abusive to our children? You say, well, yeah, that goes through my mind. All I'm saying is it's dialed back just a little bit because of the attacks on the home and the family. That's all we're saying. So our point here is that fathers are to fulfill their roles as leaders. Now, this is not in the workbook, so here's something additional if you want to make some marginal notes in your workbook. Fathers are to be leaders, and let's establish the biblical principle for that. That God put the father as the leader of the home and the family. And you say, well, where is the passage that says fathers be leaders? Well, you don't have a passage that mentions it in those words, but here is the principle. Any passage showing the husband is the head of the wife shows that he is the leader of the family. Would you agree with that? All right, let's take 2 or 3 passages. 1 Peter 3, 1 through 7. What do we learn from that? The wife is to be submissive to her husband, which means he is the leader in the marriage and in the family relationship. He's the head of the family. Well, Ephesians 5, wives are to submit to their husbands as the church is subject unto Christ. Verse 24 uses the word subject. It is a military term, meaning lining up under a superior. Not superior in the sense of they are better, but it's superior in the sense that they are indeed in rank and authority. That's the idea of Ephesians 5. Colossians chapter 3 and in verse 18 says again, husbands are the head of their wives. All right, so if the wife is to be submissive to her husband, so are the children. All right, here's another principle. Any passage that shows the father is to teach or to train the children shows he's the leader. Ephesians 6 says what? Particularly at verse 4. Fathers are not to provoke their children to wrath. Bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. He is responsible for their teaching and their instruction. Make sense? All right, let's go further. What does that mean then, that the father is the head or the father is the leader? Well, it means he has authority and he has control of his family. But the second point I want you to see, the second bullet point here, it's not so much the idea of his being the boss, but that he bears responsibility for the direction of the family. Would you agree with that? And that's a weighty responsibility. I've often made this point. Do you remember when you were a little kid thinking, I can't wait till I get to be an adult so I get to be my own boss and I can be the boss of children and I can tell other people what to do like my parents do. Only by the time you get there, you realize, finish my sentence. It ain't what you thought it was. No, it's not the idea of being boss. It means you bear weighty responsibility. Same thing we're talking about leaders on Wednesday night. You said, well, I want to be in the position of being an elder so I can be kind of the boss. When you get there, you'll find out it's just a weighty responsibility. That's all it is. Weighty responsibility. Make sense? Bearing the responsibility for the direction. So here's the point of the lesson. Fathers, be a man and stand up and lead. Stand up and lead and be the leader in your home and in your family. All right, before we go to page 23, which if you want to go there, you can, but I'm going to go over to the questions on page 26. I want to go through 2 or 3 of the questions. We don't normally have time to get to those. So we'll make time now. Let's go first to question number 5. We're not going to cover all of the questions, only 4. What are some responsibilities? List some things a father needs to provide, need to do to provide adequate leadership in the home. What are some things? We don't have to list exactly 3 or 4 or 5. What are some things a father needs to do to provide adequate leadership? All right. He needs to be an example. He needs to fulfill the word himself. Needs to be obedient himself and lead by example, not by merely telling and pointing, but he's out front leading. This is the way we do it. This is the way we go. That's what a leader is. He's out front. What else? All right, needs to have a plan. We're connecting things from Wednesday night studies of leadership. Leaders have plans, and he needs to have a plan for the home. Where are you taking the home? What direction? Where are you pointing them? And how are you going to get there? What's your goal for the children? What plans do you have, or what scheme do you have to get us there? What else?
Being active and involved.
All right, be active and involved. Very good. Don't give up. Set boundaries. We'll talk about boundaries in a moment. Let's go to question number 2. Is it possible that homosexuality stems in part from a weak father, dominant mother influence in the home? The author really didn't touch on that in the workbook, in the lesson as such, but that's a good question. Is that possible? Yes. How do we know? That's a tougher question, isn't it? Numerous studies have shown, if you've had to deal with some who are involved in homosexuality, numerous studies, and I've dealt with that, have shown that one of the common denominators is a dominant mother who dominates over the children and over the father. Often is a common denominator of homosexual men. Does that mean every one of them have that? No. Does that mean every dominant mother is going to have homosexual children? No. It just means that seems to be a common denominator. That he sees this dominance of the mother over the male. And he's minimized, his leadership is minimized, and it contributes to that. All right, let's go to question number. Let's come back to those. Let's go to page 23. Let's come back to the other two. All right, there are 3 things in the lesson today, and starting on page 23 now, there are hindrances to the father's leadership. Satan is out to undermine the father's authority. He's the master of deception. He is the liar from the beginning, John 8, verse 44. In Ephesians 6, we read about the wiles and the schemes of the devil, that he's out to destroy us. We're in a battle. We're putting on the whole armor of God, that we may be able to stand against his wiles and against his schemes. And so the point here is simply that Satan is out to undermine the father's authority. Because if the father is the leader, as God designs it, if he can cut those legs out from under the father, then he's done his job. All right, so on page 23, let's start talking about things that contribute to that. What are some things that hinder the father's leadership? Somebody back here, okay. Societal pressure. All right, and television, which is part of that societal pressure. How does TV and other media undermine the father's role? All right, yeah. How many sitcoms have you watched where the father, and it's funny, you have to admit some of it is funny, you watch the sitcom and the father or the children are always smarter than the parents, have to figure everything out for the parents. They're the ones that are smart and intelligent, but the father is always seen as some big dunce, and he is some kind of goofball. And so we're emphasizing to the kids, this is what the father's like. And so I'm not saying a kid watches one of those shows and laughs that he's going to get that, but a constant diet of that may somehow begin to infiltrate into the child. Anything else about television, how it influences and undermines the father's influence? All right. Evolution for one, much, even advertisements or television programs make an assumption. They may not teach the doctrine, but they'll make references that are based on those assumptions. Here's another. The feminist movement. How does the feminist movement undermine the father's authority? All right? Yeah, I think it's outdated. The feminists have a total disdain for the traditional family. Now, this is a point I made a moment ago, and I want to reemphasize that. It's not that the far left, the extreme left in our society, want to have a different kind of makeup of a home, but it's okay if you want to have a father and mother and children, and you be what you want to be, we just want to be what we want to be. That's not the case. They have a total disdain and hatred for the nuclear family. We're going to see more about that here in just a second. So the Bible plan is hated. Here are a couple of passages our author puts in the workbook. 1 Corinthians 11:3, the husband is the head of the wife, and it's an order of authority, and just as the son is subject to the father, and man is subject to Christ, then the woman is subject to man. Man is the head of the woman, meaning leadership and authority. They don't like that, and so they hate that. Ephesians 5, the wife is to submit to her husband. That's a concept that that's just a no-no in our society, to think about how archaic that is, of a wife submitting to her husband. And if a woman mentions in a worldly setting, but that may be at work or among friends in the world, that I'll need to ask my husband, or my husband doesn't want me to do that, what reaction will she get? Get shot, yeah. She gets ridiculed, obviously, because, I mean, what age are you living in? Are you from the 20s or the 30s or the 40s? Because we don't do that anymore. You don't ask your husband anything. And I want to suggest, and our author doesn't merely drive this point home, but that some Christian women have bought into the idea that that's degrading to women. Would you agree with that statement? There are a number of women who really kind of choke on the idea of, in a marriage ceremony, mentioning, will you obey him? Will you submit to his leadership? And they have a hard time swallowing that, because that's not what they want, to commit to obedience and submission to him. And so some Christian women. Now I want to suggest something not in the workbook, and to give you the idea. This is the fact that feminists want to destroy the family. Sophie Lewis, in 2019, this article from National File said, feminist writer wants to abolish the family for a feminist future. And I won't read every word of the quote, but makes the point, this article makes the point that the agenda is to destroy. They've come out in the open that we feminists, we can't have a feminist future without abolishing the family. We've got to abolish the father, mother, and child relationship. We've got to get rid of the family time and again. And this article goes on to say that she brazenly admits that despite its utopian theme, what in practice is a logical conclusion of her brand of feminism and is disillusion of the nuclear family. We've got to do away with the father and the mother and marriage and children. We've got to do away with that kind of relationship. They used COVID-19, Phyllis Schlafly's publication in 2020, they used COVID-19 to abolish the family. What was interesting was they talked about this capitalism is the household's pressure cooker. And meaning by that this crisis will surge, that this shelter in place, let's get back at home and let's not get out in public during that crisis, supposed crisis, that's going to lead to housework and cleaning and cooking and caretaking, also abuse, intimate partner rape and psychological torture and more. And I have other quotes that talk about that the men are just, if you go back to the home and everybody spend time together, the men will become abusive. Maybe in some cases, but that's an assumption that men are bad. So we got to get rid of the home and the family as we know it. So the home is under attack. Let's move to another hindrance, materialism. How does materialism serve as a hindrance to the father's leadership? He can't lead because of materialism. All right, because they're out to get more and more and more, then they don't spend time with the children. We'll come back to that. Yeah, he's absent. Yeah, look at Luke 12:15. Life does not consist of the abundance of things which man possesses. Remember that statement of Jesus? That's not what life's about. Materialism says that's what life is about. So materialism may force, now let's define materialism before we go back to point 2 there. Materialism is not being wealthy. It's not having possessions. How would you define materialism? Yeah, not being satisfied with what I have. I need more, I need greater, I need bigger, I need better. The emphasis is more on the here and the now and the material over the spiritual, without giving any look at how does this affect my spirituality, my family's spirituality. So that materialism may force the father away from the home and the mother becomes the leader by default. We'll say more about her default leadership in a moment. It may force the mother away from the home. And then the leaders, and I put that in quotation, may be the grandparents. It may be the babysitter. It may be a friend because mom and dad are trying to keep up and they're not in the home with the children. That's possible. Would you agree with that? All right, let's go further. Well, we're on page 24. If you're following in the workbook, at the top of the next page, page 24, extracurricular activities. What's he talking about? Yeah, that's just a beginning of the list. I make the point here, point number 1, that's not wrong within itself. And so you have your children enrolled in this sport, have them enrolled in this sport, and maybe it's this other activity. Here's a class. Here's another class you enroll them in. Did you want them to learn this? And here's the problem. It may crowd out time we have together as a family. So that as we come in from school, or they come in from school and we come in from work, we're rushing off to this game, we're rushing off to this activity and this activity and this activity, and we do that night after night after night, and we really don't have time together as a family to eat together and to talk and discuss. Or it may just simply crowd out spiritual matters. We don't have a great deal of time for spiritual things because we're involved in extracurricular activities. What else would we say about the danger? Good point. Very good point. Yeah, I'll make the point right here. Point number 3. That fathers, you may have to curtail and limit some of that with your children because, finish my sentence, you are the leader. You may have to say, okay, we're going to have to limit that. And this may be a good opportunity for children to learn to make choices. You're going to have to choose whether you're going to have this sport or have this class. We can't do both. That's not a bad thing for children to have to miss out on something that they really, really want. An indispensable part of happiness is doing without some of the things we want. That's part of contentment. And so a child may have to make a choice, and you may have to guide them. But fathers, you may have to be the one that says, we're going to curtail some of this. This is detrimental to our spirituality as a family, and we're going to stop some of this. We're going to rein this in. Not cut it all out, but we're going to rein that in. Would you agree with that? All right, let's go further. Here's another thing that serves as a hindrance. The father's laziness or abdicating his position. What does that mean? All right. He just gives it up. Here's my leadership role, and someone else take that. Why would he do that? All right, don't want to spend time. What'd you start to say? May just be lazy. Some husbands want to blame their wives if things don't go well. Husbands like to take the credit when it goes well, but the male ego sometimes makes him want to blame somebody when it doesn't go well. So basically, and I'm going to exaggerate for emphasis, he shoves the decision over to his wife, and then when it didn't go well, I didn't think it was going to work. I didn't think this was a good idea. But if it works well, then He'd be glad to take the credit. You know, what we did, this is what we did with our children. And so he sometimes may also, point number 3, may not be able to make a decision without her because he's afraid of making a decision, afraid of ruffling her feathers. Maybe afraid of ruffling the children's feathers. I know of some fathers that are afraid of their children, literally afraid of their children. Yes, sir. Good point, yeah. I'm supposed to be the provider. I'm making a living. I'm providing a good living. And so leave that all rest to the mother. And when all of that happens, she by default becomes the leader. There are some women, I'm going to make another point here in a second that our author does, but about women being domineering. But that's not what we're talking about here. There may be some women who by default become leaders and don't really want to be the leader in the family, but somebody has to lead the family and he's not leading. So she by default has to kind of be the leader in the family. And she's trying to guide them in the right direction because he's not doing that. All right, here's another. Our author mentions this just in a brief passing comment. A domineering wife can be a hindrance to his leadership. As we use the expression through the years, she wears the pants in the family. What does that mean? Has nothing to do with her attire, by the way. She's making all the decisions. She is the leader. And often he's intimidated or he may be manipulated. There's some husbands that are intimidated by their wives. They're manipulated easy, and so she takes advantage of that. Or it may be that she pushes back or complains about his decisions. And so every decision he makes, she complains and she pushes back. And so finally he just gives in and that's the way it is. She's out of her role and contrary to the scriptures, 1 Peter chapter 3. All right. Any other comments on the hindrances before we move further? All right, I want to look at some examples. Now we're on page 24, examples of godly leaders. I want to quickly mention this because I want us to get to the third section before we get through. Abraham is presented here as an example. So let's look at Genesis 18 and in verse 19. Genesis 18 and in verse 19. Abraham was told by God, you tell me. Say again. All right, yes. To command his children and his household after him. I'm hesitating because I'm not there yet. All right, here we are. Yes, that he may command his children and his household after him. So here's the point to be made from this text. Abraham was already considered as a righteous man, Genesis 15:6. Meaning he's doing the commands of God himself. Make sense? So here's the point. First keep the way of the Lord, then command his children to follow after him. Rather than saying, here's what you need to do, but I'm not doing it myself, but you need to do this. This is best for you. He does it himself first, and then he commands his children after him. And so fathers can't expect to lead unless they're leading in the way themselves. Now, what about Joshua being a great leader in the family? What did he say? Yeah, as for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord. Here's the point. He made up his mind ahead of time. In other words, a father, I'm not saying there's not difficult decisions a father has to wrestle with and say, I don't know what we're going to do here. All fathers do that. But generally, how you're going to lead the family should have been a decision made even before you ended up getting married. That when I get married, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. This is the direction we're going. What's revealed here in the text, that's where we're going. That's how I'm going to lead my children. And so he had already made his mind up. So that was a determined spirit. And notice he said, choose you this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house. What does that tell you? He's the leader of his house. He's the leader. I'm looking for something else. Yeah, say that again. Yeah, even if no one else follows, this is what we're going to do. Everybody else goes that direction, we're going this direction. Is for me and my family, that's where we're going. And that's what fathers need to say. Y'all can do what you want to, but my family, this is what we're doing. Here's our principles. Here's what we're following. Make sense? Fathers have to be leaders. All right. I think that was all with reference to Joshua. Take strength, courage to do that. Now he mentions Christ. That's not an example of a earthly father and mother leading their children, but Christ is a leader, and so there's some things we learn from that. 1 Peter chapter 1 says, Jesus left us an example that we should follow in his steps. So he serves as an example in leadership. We know that because in Ephesians 5, Paul, in dealing with how the wife is to be submissive to her husband, gives Christ as an example in the church, that the church is subject unto Christ in everything, Ephesians 5:24. Make sense? All right, let's make some application of that. You tell me. If Christ is my example of what a leader is in the home, what should I learn from that as a father? Self-sacrifice. I'm willing to do whatever it takes for the good of the home and the family, for my wife and for my children, even of my sacrifice of myself. Good point. What else? Absolutely. Look out for their good. The father's not going to say some unkind thing to the wife or to the children. It's going to be out of love. He may have to make some unpopular decisions with the family. I mean, the wife may not like the decision he made. The children may not like the decision, but he has to make those decisions. Jesus had some unpopular decisions and unpopular rules, and so he's going to be one who teaches the children as well. Now let's go to page 25 and see if we can wrap up with this principle. So we saw hindrances to the father's leadership, examples of godly leaders. But let's talk about fathers are to guard the home. There's a sense in which he's out front leading, saying, this is the way we're going this direction, y'all follow me. But there's another sense in which he stands at the door as the guard and the protector. Maybe physically he has to do that. When there's danger at the literal door, who should be the one to go to the door and see what the problem is? He doesn't send his wife or his children. He goes and, if somebody loses their life, it needs to be him. Would you agree? Takes care of his family. But that's not what this is about. The father must view his children as precious souls that need to be guarded. Why? They're what? They're easily taken. They're easily influenced. Satan is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may. Does that include your children? You bet he wants to take your children. Satan is out to take your child. And he's as much after your child as any child in the world. And so fathers have to be a guard. Satan's going to use whatever it takes. Lies, deceits, friends, school, professors. Our author doesn't mention this. 2 Corinthians 2:11. Satan can use tools that seem like it's the right thing, the helpful thing, the better thing to do, and yet it's the wrong tool. I don't have time to develop that, but that's where some were not forgiving the brother and reminding the brother who had committed fornication that you did wrong, that's one of the devices of Satan, meaning Satan makes you think I'm doing the right thing when actually you're doing the wrong thing. In fact, I'm doing the better thing. You forgave him, but I'm against sin more so than you because you forgave, but I'm still reminding him of sin. And so I think I'm more in harmony with the scriptures than you are. I'm doing the right thing. Satan can make us think that. And so we need to be very, very careful. Now, so what's our defense? God's Word. Ephesians 6. Take with you the sword of the Spirit. Remember that? Which is the, verse 17, Word of God. So that we can stand against the wiles, the schemes, the plans of the devil. That's the tool. So fathers, you're a guard. You're guarding your household. You're standing at the door guarding your family. And you have the Word of God to guard it with. You have the sword. You take with you the helmet of salvation. Other things mentioned there. I cite 2 Timothy chapter 3. I want to take just a moment to mention 2 Timothy 3. And I'm going to have to do this quickly because I want to get to one more question if we can. 2 Timothy chapter 3 talks about the perilous times. You've heard me develop this thought many times. Verses 1 to 5, take a quick glance through verses 1 to 5. You see all these characteristics of corruption. Sounds like America 2024. Blasphemers, lovers of money, boasters, proud, unloving, unforgiving, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. Wow. Wicked, wicked men. And you say, I'd hate to raise kids in that environment. Well, you are. You are raising kids in that environment. Why? Look at verse 8. Because they resist the truth. Just as Janice and Jambres resisted Moses, so do these resist the truth. So why is the world corrupt? Because we've pushed back against the word. So what's the answer? Look at verse 16. What's the answer? Yeah, it is not by the way. Oh, by the way, the Bible's inspired. Take that Bible that is inspired. It is the answer to the problems of verses 1 to 5. So there's a war out there that's trying to get into your house and trying to infiltrate, and you've got to stand at the door and be the guard of your family and say, through the Word of God, this inspired Word, I can fight against all of these ills. There's lovers of pleasure, lovers of men, there's all kinds of corruption, there's hatred, and I've got to stand at the door and guard against all of that through the Word of God. Make sense? All right. Now, with that in mind, I want to go back to our questions, page 26 now. Let's go there, and let's go to question number 10. What are some boundaries that need to be set in the home? If you're in charge of an animal, you have to set boundaries or the animal's going to run off. The dog, the cow, the horse, whatever you got. I'm not saying your child is like an animal, but just like maintaining control of the animal, you got to have boundaries for your children. What boundaries need to be set? Question 10. All right. With reference to entertainment, what kind of entertainment we're going to allow and we're going to tolerate in this home. What else? Boundaries. Who their friends are going to be. Do you think a parent has a right to say, I don't think we're going to let you spend time with this family or this person? Can parents do that? Not only can they should and must. Absolutely. What else? What are the boundaries? All right. Needs to be some discipline to control those boundaries.
Boundaries on how time is spent.
Yeah, managing time. Maybe limit some time of the television, screen time on the computer, phones, Facebook, Instagram, whatever else may be out there. Do you have a right to do that as a parent? Yeah, you do. What are the boundaries?
One that's always been the history is the family sitting down at dinner time and sharing a common meal together and talk about what went on for the day, good, the bad. And it reinforces the family.
All right. It does. It does.
It goes back to also, Donnie, is who their friends are. If you know that, you got to be careful because, like you said, the devil's out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Setting limits of where the children go, who they're with, how long they stay, whether they spend the night. You may be ridiculed by other parents for being kind of strict. But when it works for you and it didn't work for someone else, started to say, you'll be the one laughing. Nobody's going to be laughing, but you'll be happy that you made your choices. You'll be happy you made your choices. We're going to end on that note.